In my family, I was always the forgotten middle child, the one whose ideas were dismissed before I could finish a sentence. For 30 years, my father ran Hanover Manufacturing with an iron fist, grooming my older brother Alexander to take over while treating me like an afterthought. So when Dad announced at Thanksgiving dinner that he was selling the family business for $50 million, and none of us would see a penny, I was not surprised. My siblings actually cheered at the news. That is when I smiled and asked Dad, "Who is the buyer?" He proudly replied, "Everest Holdings." I could not help but laugh as I said, "Dad, I am Everest Holdings." The room went silent. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on my family that day, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from, and hit subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by those who should have believed in you most. Growing up as a Hanover meant living in the shadow of Hanover, manufacturing the Precision Tool Company. My grandfather started in his garage after World War II. By the time I was born, it had grown into a regional powerhouse with 3 factories and over 200 employees. Our family home reflected that success, a sprawling colonial on 5 acres with a view of the lake where business discussions dominated every dinner conversation. My father, Richard Hanover, was more CEO than Dad, bringing his authoritarian management style home each night. My mother, Eleanor, played peacekeeper, smoothing ruffled feathers when Dad went too far, which was often. The family hierarchy was established early and reinforced daily. Alexander, my older brother by 4 years, was the crown prince destined to inherit the company. Victoria, 2 years. My senior was the diplomat, charming and politically savvy. Daniel, 5 years. My junior was the baby, and inexplicably, our father's favorite, despite his complete lack of interest in responsibility. And then there was me, Thaddeus, perpetually overlooked. I showed interest in the business from age 8 when I started asking questions about the manufacturing processes during our obligatory factory tours. Dad would smile tightly and say, "Let Alexander answer," that even when my brother clearly had no idea. By 12, I was designing improvements to product packaging that went ignored, until Alexander presented the same ideas months later to enthusiastic praise. My teenage years brought academic achievements that barely registered at home. While my parents attended every one of Alexander's average basketball games, they missed my National Merit Scholarship ceremony because it conflicted with Victoria's debate tournament. When I graduated top of my class and earned a full scholarship to Wharton for business, Dad merely nodded and said, "Book smarts do not translate to the shop floor, Thaddeus." The summer before college, I requested an internship at the company. "We do not have anything suitable for you," Dad dismissed, despite having created positions for both Alexander and Victoria. Instead, I found my own internship at a competing manufacturer, where my process improvement suggestions saved them nearly $300,000 in my first month. When I excitedly shared this at dinner, Dad changed the subject to Daniel's summer camp achievements. College brought more of the same. During holiday breaks, I was excluded from family business discussions that included even Daniel, despite his complete disinterest. "These conversations would bore you," Thaddeus, Dad, would say, though I was literally studying business management, while Alexander had barely passed with a marketing degree. The final straw came after graduation. Despite my offers from top consulting firms, I approached Dad about joining the family business. We sat in his mahogany-paneled home office, where I presented a detailed analysis of international expansion opportunities I had researched specifically for Hanover Manufacturing. "This is all very theoretical, Thaddeus," he said, without really looking at my presentation. "Alexander has real-world experience now. He understands our business culture. Dad, Alexander has worked here for 4 years and has never once visited the factory floor," I pointed out. "The foremen do not even know his name." Dad's face hardened. "That is enough. Alexander understands relationship building. Victoria understands negotiation. Even Daniel brings creativity. You have always been too analytical, too rigid. Not everyone is suited for this business." I left home that day with a clarity I had never felt before. They would never see my value, so I would need to prove it in a way they could not ignore. I accepted a position with a venture capital firm in Boston, far enough from our Connecticut home to avoid family gatherings, except on major holidays. For the next decade, I lived a double life. To my family, I was pursuing a vague finance career they never bothered to understand. In reality, I was methodically building expertise in manufacturing acquisitions, learning every aspect of valuation, turnaround strategies, and industry trends. I changed my professional name slightly, going by TJ Hanover, rather than Thaddeus, creating just enough separation to operate without family connections. After 5 years in venture capital, I had saved enough to launch Everest Holdings, named after a childhood dream to climb the world's highest peak, something my father had called impractical and pointless. I started small, acquiring distressed manufacturing businesses, implementing modern technologies and management practices, then either selling them for profit or keeping them in my growing portfolio. By year 8, Everest Holdings had become known for fair dealings and successful turnarounds. I had a team of 20 talented professionals who shared my vision for American manufacturing revitalization. My personal net worth had surpassed $60 million, though I lived modestly and reinvested most profits. Through industry connections, I heard rumors that Hanover Manufacturing was struggling. Alexander had gradually taken over operations, implementing flashy marketing campaigns while neglecting core infrastructure. Victoria handled client relations but had no interest in production efficiencies. Daniel occasionally appeared for board meetings, but spent most of his trust fund on failed artistic ventures. Dad remained chairman, but was increasingly disconnected from daily operations. When an industry contact mentioned that Richard Hanover was quietly exploring selling options, I knew my moment had arrived. Using intermediaries, I arranged for Everest Holdings to express interest, knowing Dad would respond to our reputation for preserving company legacies while modernizing operations. I stayed anonymous throughout the process, with my team handling all communications. By Thanksgiving, I knew the deal was nearly complete. Dad had accepted our offer of $50 million, believing he was selling to strangers who would retain the company name and most employees. What he did not know was that I had personally inspected every inch of the now outdated factories, reviewed every contract, and interviewed key employees. I knew the company's value and potential better than anyone else in the world, including the family that had built it. 10 years of patience was about to pay off in a single dinner conversation. The Hanover family estate looked exactly as it always had. Each Thanksgiving, imposing colonial architecture decorated with tasteful autumn wreaths, perfectly manicured lawns, now dusted with November frost, and the American flag flying prominently by the circular driveway. I parked my modest Audi among the Mercedes and BMWs belonging to my siblings, straightened my tie, and prepared for the performance of a lifetime. Thaddeus punctual as always, Mom greeted me at the door with her customary kiss on the cheek. At 65, Eleanor Hanover remained elegant in her cashmere sweater and pearls, though new worry lines had formed around her eyes. Everyone is in the living room. Your father has news. The living room tableau could have been from any Thanksgiving of the past decade. Dad occupied his leather armchair like a throne, nursing a scotch, while reviewing papers despite the holiday. Alexander stood by the fireplace in an expensive but ill-fitting suit, loudly explaining his latest business strategy to Victoria, who nodded while checking her phone. Daniel sprawled across the sofa, designer jeans and rumpled button-down, signaling his continuing rebellion against family formality. The prodigal middle child returns, Alexander called out, raising his whiskey in mock salute. Still pushing papers in Boston? Something like that, I replied with a smile, accepting a glass of bourbon from the housekeeper. How are things at the company? Transitional Victoria interjected before Alexander could respond. But promising. Very promising. Dad cleared his throat. We will discuss all that over dinner. Eleanor, is the food nearly ready? The dining room maintained its museum-like formality, crystal chandelier illuminating the antique mahogany table, family silver, polished to a mirror shine. Grandmother Hanover's china displayed for the annual feast. We took our assigned seats unchanged since childhood, with Dad at the head and Mom at the foot. Alexander sat at Dad's right hand, Victoria, and Daniel, along one side, leaving me alone on the opposite side, facing my siblings like a perpetual outsider. Mom directed the staff to serve the traditional turkey dinner, while Dad held court discussing politics and market trends with Alexander, while the rest of us provided occasional comments. I observed more than participated, noting the subtle tension in the room, the way Victoria kept glancing at Dad expectantly, how Alexander seemed simultaneously arrogant and anxious. Before dessert, Dad announced after the main course plates were cleared, "I have something important to share with all of you." He stood commanding the room as he had done in countless board meetings. "As some of you already know, your mother and I have been considering our future plans." Alexander straightened Victoria, set down her phone, and even Daniel looked up with interest. I maintained a neutral expression, though my heart raced with anticipation. "After 50 years of building this business," Dad continued, "I have decided it is time for a change. We are selling Hanover Manufacturing." Despite expecting this announcement, the official confirmation sent a jolt through me. This was really happening. "The deal is nearly final," Dad added. "The papers will be signed next week." Mom smiled tightly, clearly, having processed this information already. Alexander's face remained carefully blank, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. Victoria nodded slightly, as if confirming a private hypothesis. "There is something else you should all know," Dad said, his voice taking on an unusual tone of defiance. "Your mother and I have decided that the proceeds from this sale will be used exclusively to fund our retirement. In plain English, none of you are getting a share. We are finally going to enjoy our golden years, travel the world, and live without responsibility to this family or the business." I braced for outrage, for protests and accusations. What happened instead left me momentarily speechless. Alexander laughed and clapped his hands together. "Thank God, I have been trying to figure out how to tell you. I accepted a VP position at Brunswick Industries, starting January." Victoria beamed. "That is wonderful news, Dad. I was worried you were going to ask me to take over more responsibilities. My consulting practice is taking off, and I just do not have the bandwidth for Hanover anymore." Most surprisingly, Daniel actually stood up and hugged Dad. "This is the best news ever. No more guilt trips about joining the family business. I can focus on my photography without the constant disappointment speeches." Mom looked stunned by their reactions, and Dad seemed momentarily thrown off balance. He had clearly expected resistance, or at least disappointment. Instead, his children were celebrating their release from the family legacy. I remained silent, calculating my next move, as I absorbed this unexpected development. My siblings had been as unhappy with their prescribed roles as I had been with my exclusion. The irony was almost too perfect. After the initial excitement settled, I spoke up, my voice casual but clear. "Dad, who is the buyer?" Dad regained his composure, seemingly pleased to share this detail. "A company called Everest Holdings. They specialize in preserving manufacturing businesses while modernizing operations. They are paying $50 million, which is more than fair given the current market conditions." I felt a slow smile spread across my face as I reached for my wallet and extracted a business card. I slid it across the table toward my father. "That is interesting, Dad, because I am Everest Holdings." The silence that followed was absolute. Dad stared at my card, then at me, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and shock. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Victoria froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Alexander's face flushed deep red. Daniel let out a surprised laugh before catching himself. "What the hell does that mean, you are Everest Holdings?" Alexander finally sputtered. "It means," I said, leaning back in my chair, "that I am the CEO and majority owner of the company that is buying Hanover Manufacturing. I founded Everest Holdings 10 years ago after Dad made it clear there was no place for me in the family business." Dad finally found his voice. "This is absurd. Everest Holdings is a respected firm with significant assets and multiple successful acquisitions." "Yes," I agreed. all built from scratch by the son you never thought had any business acumen. The perfect Thanksgiving tableau shattered as everyone began talking at once. "This must be some kind of joke," Alexander said, his voice rising. "There is no way you built a company capable of a $50 million acquisition." Dad snatched my business card and examined it like it might be counterfeit. "T.J. Hanover, CEO, Everest Holdings," he read aloud. "I go by T.J. Professionally," I explained. "It created just enough separation to build my own reputation without family connections or interference." "You cannot do this," Dad declared, moving from shock to anger. "This deal was negotiated in bad faith. You had inside information." Actually, I countered calmly. I had less insider information than you might think. I have not been welcome in company discussions for over a decade, remember. Everything Everest knows about Hanover Manufacturing was obtained through proper due diligence, legal research, and industry-standard practices. Victoria, always the quickest to adapt, shifted strategies immediately. "Thaddeus, this is actually brilliant. A perfect solution to keep the company in the family while giving Mom and Dad their retirement. We should discuss how the rest of us might be involved going forward." "Now, wait, just a minute," Alexander interrupted. "If anyone should have a management position in this new arrangement, it should be me. I have been running day-to-day operations for years." I could not help but laugh. "Running them into the ground, you mean? Profits down 40%. Over 5 years employee turnover at record highs. Equipment maintenance deferred to dangerous levels. Should I continue?" Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal water glasses jump. "This discussion needs to happen in my study. Now." As we moved from the dining room, Mom touched my arm. "Did you really build a company that size on your own?" She whispered something like wonder in her voice. "Yes," I said simply. "Everything Dad said you could never do with books alone." In the study, the family dynamics shifted visibly. Dad took his seat behind the desk out of habit, but the power in the room had clearly moved. Alexander paced nervously, while Victoria perched attentively on a leather chair. Daniel leaned against a bookshelf, watching the proceedings with newfound interest. "Let me be clear," I began before Dad could start. "The deal for Hanover Manufacturing will proceed as negotiated. Everest Holdings will acquire all assets and intellectual property for $50 million, which will go to you and Mom as agreed. That part remains unchanged." "And what happens to the company?" Mom asked from the doorway. "It gets the modernization it has desperately needed for years," I replied. "New equipment, updated processes, proper maintenance, and employee training programs that should have been implemented a decade ago." I turned to my father. "Did you know your factory floor employees have been working with safety equipment that violates 3 OSHA regulations, or that your main production line breaks down on average twice weekly because Alexander denied the maintenance? Supervisors' equipment, replacement requests, for 3 years running." Dad glanced at Alexander, who avoided his gaze. "The business you built was solid." "Dad," I continued, "the foundation is still good, but the management in recent years has been disastrous. With proper leadership, Hanover Manufacturing could be worth twice what I am paying within 5 years. And you think you are that proper leadership?" Dad scoffed, but with less conviction than usual. In response, I opened my laptop and pulled up a presentation. "This is the 10-year strategic plan I developed for Hanover Manufacturing. It includes market analysis, competitor positioning, modernization requirements, and growth projections." I turned to the last slide. "And this is the actual performance of Everest Holdings' previous 7 acquisitions against our projections. We exceeded targets in 6 cases and met them in the 7th. The room fell silent as they absorbed the detailed analysis and impressive results. "Why did you not tell us about your company?" Mom asked quietly. "Would you have believed me?" I countered. "Or would it have been dismissed as theoretical and book smart, like every other idea I ever presented in this house?" No one had an answer for that. Alexander, ever the opportunist, shifted tactics. "Well, brother, it seems you have outmaneuvered us all. I imagine you will need experienced management to help with the transition. I already have an experienced management team, I replied. People who earn their positions through competence rather than birth. Victoria tried next. Thaddeus, you have to admit, my client relationships could be valuable. I know all the key players, most of whom have been reducing their orders year over year, I noted, but I appreciate the offer. Daniel, surprisingly, was the most direct. So what happens to us now? That was the question I had been waiting for. That depends on what each of you actually wants, rather than what was expected of you. I turned to my father. The deal stands exactly as negotiated. You and Mom get your $50 million and retirement. The company continues under new ownership with the Hanover name preserved as promised. And your sibling's dad asked some of his composure returning. That is up to them, I said. Unlike you, I will not decide their futures without their input. For the next hour, we had the most honest conversation our family had ever experienced. Alexander admitted he had hated running the company, but felt trapped by expectations. Victoria confessed she had been planning to leave for years, but felt guilty abandoning the family business. Daniel revealed he had only acted disinterested because he knew he could never live up to Dad's standards. As the night grew late, tempers cooled and reality set in. Dad, looking suddenly older, finally asked the question I had been waiting for. Why did you do it this way? Why the deception? You could have just told us you wanted to buy the company. I looked him directly in the eyes. Would you have sold it to me? Your afterthought son? With all his impractical book knowledge, his silence was answer enough. I needed to be valued for once, I said quietly. Not as your son, but as a businessman worthy of respect. The only way to get that was to become someone you did not recognize but could not help but admire. In that moment, something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect yet, but recognition. For the first time in my life, my father was truly seeing me. 3 months later, I sat at the desk in what had once been my father's office, now mine as CEO of Hanover Precision Manufacturing, the rebranded company under Everest Holdings ownership. The office had been completely renovated, the dark wood paneling replaced with glass walls that offered visibility to the production floor below. The symbolic change reflected our new transparency in operations and management. The transition had been smoother than anticipated in some ways, more challenging in others. I kept my promise to retain most employees, focusing instead on replacing outdated equipment and unsafe practices. The workers, initially skeptical of another Hanover in charge, had quickly embraced changes that made their jobs safer and more efficient. As for my family, each had found their own path forward. Alexander predictably had joined a competitor, but was already struggling with their corporate culture. Victoria, after initial resistance, had approached me with a genuine business proposition, using her negotiation skills to help acquire new clients. After a thorough interview process, I had hired her as a consultant, not a favor, but a business decision that was already paying dividends. Most surprisingly, Daniel had found purpose managing a community outreach program I had established, providing manufacturing training for unemployed workers. His creative thinking and genuine empathy made him remarkably effective in a role none of us could have imagined for him. My parents had purchased a beachfront condo in Florida and were enjoying their retirement. Mom called weekly, our relationship slowly healing. Dad was more distant, still processing the shift in our family dynamic. But we had established a monthly lunch meeting that was gradually becoming less awkward. My assistant knocked on the glass door. Your mother is here to see you. Mom entered, looking tanned and relaxed in casual clothes, a stark contrast to the formal attire she had worn her entire married life. The place looks different, she observed, glancing around. Your father would hardly recognize it. That is rather the point, I said, rising to hug her. She set a small box on my desk. I found this while unpacking some old storage boxes. I thought you might want it. Inside was a faded business plan I had written at 16, detailing improvements for Hanover Manufacturing. Red pen marks covered the margins in my father's handwriting, most of them dismissive. I always knew you understood this business better than anyone, she said quietly. Even your father. I should have said something all those years ago. Why did you not? She sighed. It was a different generation, Thaddeus. Wives did not contradict their husbands, especially about business. It was wrong of me, and I am sorry. That simple apology healed something I had not realized was still wounded. The following Thanksgiving looked nothing like the one a year earlier. We gathered not at the family estate, but at my new home, a restored farmhouse with enough space for everyone but none of the ostentation of my parents' place. The meal was catered, allowing everyone to relax, rather than Mom spending days in preparation. As we sat around the table, the hierarchy had visibly shifted. I occupied neither head nor the isolated side, but rather the middle connecting both sides of the family. Victoria sat with her new boyfriend, an architect with no connection to manufacturing. Daniel brought 2 of his program graduates now employed at our factory. Alexander had declined the invitation, the only one still unable to adapt to our new reality. Dad, seated across from me, raised his glass. "I would like to propose a toast," he said, his voice less commanding than it once had been, "to Hanover Precision Manufacturing and its excellent first quarter results." I nodded in acknowledgement, recognizing this as the closest he could come to openly admitting my success. And to second chances, Mom added softly, "for all of us." As we clinked glasses, I reflected on the journey of the past year. My original motivation had been partly revenge, partly validation, but what I had found was something more valuable, not just professional success, but personal growth, beyond the need for my father's approval. I had proven myself, not just to my family, but more importantly, to myself. The company was thriving under leadership that valued both tradition and innovation. Employees received better benefits and profit sharing. Our community programs were creating opportunities for people who had been overlooked, just as I once was. In rebuilding the company, I had somehow helped rebuild our broken family as well, not to what it had been, but to something healthier. Being underestimated had ultimately been my greatest advantage. It allowed me to exceed expectations that had never existed, to succeed beyond what anyone thought possible. The quiet middle child had built something lasting, not just a successful business, but a life on his own terms. Have you ever been in a situation where people underestimated your potential or dismissed your ideas? Share your story in the comments below about how you proved them wrong or are working to do so. If this journey of turning the tables on those who never believed in you resonated, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of unexpected comebacks. Consider sharing this video with someone who might need encouragement to persist, despite being overlooked. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes being underestimated is your greatest opportunity to surprise everyone, including yourself.